Today I want to discuss the concept of what is called the transfer of merit, the transfer of karmic merit that we can apparently make. I want to go through the question as to whether we can find such a concept in early Buddhism and what it might mean. So what is the transfer of merit? We may have run across in some of our encounters with Buddhist teachers this idea that we may make merit for ourselves and then transfer it to others. In particular, at the end of a practice, you may hear a meditation teacher talking about taking the merit of our practice and transferring it or using it for the benefit of all beings. Now, what does this really mean? Well, to begin with, it means that we believe we're engaged in a practice that is productive of merit to begin with. The idea being, if we're engaged in, let's say, a session of mindfulness meditation, that is a meritorious action, it's a skillful act. Therefore, we're building up some kind of storehouse of merit of some kind. And at the end of the practice, then, we engage ourselves in a further act of a meritorious action, which is the meritorious action of generosity. So it's not simply that we're giving away our own accumulated merits, but that in so doing, we're also doing something that's itself meritorious, because again, any action of generosity is a meritorious action in a Buddhist understanding. But in certain respects, this idea of giving away our own good karma to others fits uncomfortably with certain concepts that we find in the early Buddhist Dharma. For example, this very famous passage from the Dhammapada says, "For it is by oneself that evil is done, one is corrupted by oneself. It's by oneself that evil's not done, one is purified by oneself. Purity and impurity are personal matters, no one can purify another." No one can purify another. This implies that we cannot ourselves purify somebody or help them simply by the transference of our own karmic merit to them. We read a similar idea in an early Buddhist text known as the Way to the Beyond. It's considered to be one of the very earliest texts in the canon, at least by some scholars. And in that text we read about a Brahmin, Dotaka. And Dotaka goes to the Buddha and asks him to relieve him of his doubts. Dotaka has doubts about the right path, and he asks the Buddha simply to relieve him of those doubts. And the Buddha replies, "I am not able to release anyone in the world who has doubts, Dotaka." Instead, the Buddha says that Dotaka has to release himself through his own understanding of the Dharma. He has to do his own work for himself in order to release himself from those doubts. In other words, no one can purify another. So if this idea of transfer of merit seems to fit sort of poorly with certain other ideas of the early Buddhist Dharma, where does the idea come from? Where does it arise from? Well, it certainly seems to have been in the air in early Buddhism. There are a number of apparent examples of the transference of merit, or at least the attempt to do so in the early texts. However, it's not clear whether such attempts are really successful. One example involves the Buddha in discussion with a Brahmin. This is the case of Saccaka. And Saccaka has a debate with the Buddha. He loses that debate, and in recompense for his loss for the debate, he offers to give the Buddha a banquet, and the Buddha and all of the Buddha's monastics in attendance, he'll give them a banquet. And so he calls on his followers, the Lichavis, to provide the food for the banquet. And at the termination, at the end of that banquet, it seems as though what Saccaka tries to do is to donate the merit of this banquet to the Lichavis. The Buddha, however, says that that's not possible. What the Buddha says is that the Lichavis, what they've done is to donate the food to Saccaka, and it's Saccaka who, through his intentions and actions, has essentially donated the food to the Buddha. So what the Buddha basically says is the Lichavis will gain the merit of having donated the food to Suchaka, and Suchaka will gain the merit of having donated that same food to the Buddha. Different intentions, different actions, different karmic results. But each gains the merit of their own intention, their own intended action. And in the early texts, there are many examples of people making offerings to deities or to departed persons. And these, for the Buddha, in an early Buddhist context, these are functionally really no different from making offerings to the Sangha or to the Buddha himself, although of less karmic merit because the recipients of the generosity are not as meritorious as the Sangha or the Buddha himself. Although the Buddha did not sanction any kind of blood sacrifice at all, he was opposed to that, nevertheless he had no problems with other kinds of sacrificial practices, the ones that were engaged in by Vedic Brahmins or other people. He believed that they were beneficial for worldly ends. That is to say, within ancient India, one would make these kinds of sacrifices of, let's say, milk or ghee or something like that. We would put it in the sacrificial fire in order to gain some worldly benefits, such as a longer lifespan or a larger family or more wealth or more power, something like that. And the Buddha was perfectly willing to sanction that and say that that might be very useful if that's what your end, if that was the sort of end you were looking for. And similar processes, similar kinds of sacrifices were traditionally done to one's departed ancestors or departed friends or family members. But the larger point here is that these are not sacrifices or donation of merit, of karmic merit in particular. These were rather the sorts of donations that were made within a Brahminic context of, let's say, food or milk or ghee or something like that, that was sacrificed to these ancestors, not karmic merit in particular. So what we find in early Buddhism is the broad idea that any kind of generous action is meritorious, and in particular that sacrifices made to deities or departed beings, because it is a generous act, it's an act of sacrificing some form of, let's say, food or drink or something like that, that it would also be, in a similar sense, meritorious in many conditions. But in none of these cases are we talking about the donation of merit in particular. So the question then is there any sense to be made at all of karmic merit from an early Buddhist perspective, or is it simply a kind of a mistake? Well, there is, I think, an additional route here, which is that we can, in the one instance, donate the effects of our merit. In other words, through our own karmic merit, we have achieved, let's say we have gained food, we've gained wealth, we've gained milk and ghee, and therefore in sacrificing that food and that milk or donating it or giving wealth to the Sangha or whatever it might be, we are in effect donating the effects of our merit. We're not, in other words, we're not donating the merit itself, we can't do that, but we can donate its effects, which is functionally very similar. And even our good wishes and hopes and kindness to others is a kind of a generosity to them, and is based upon, in a Buddhist sense, our own good karma from the past, which enables us to be in a kindly state of mind. And if others see our kindness, it may benefit their states of mind as well. And in that sense, once again, we can donate the effects of our karmic merit by introducing into others a happy or pleasant or more positive state of mind that will help them be better in the future in their lives. So in these metaphorical ways, we can transfer our karmic merits by literally transferring our wealth or our wellness or our happiness or our kindness to others through normal interactions. Further, and I think this should not be overlooked, the desire and intention to donate one's karmic merit is itself a beneficial and a pleasant, a skillful kind of mental state, because it's a state of generosity, even if it's not literally possible on an early Buddhist understanding. Later on, I think, the concept of karmic merit took on more of a kind of a storehouse quality, a kind of a spiritual materialist quality in the sense that Chogyam Trungpa talked about relatively recently, where we begin to think of karmic merit more as a kind of a physical wealth almost that was piled up somewhere that could be donated to others the way we might donate food or money. And I think we see sort of glimmers of that kind of materialist kind of approach to karma in Sachaka's example, where he wished to donate the merit to the Lichavis. So I think while we don't find a literal example of transfer of merit in early Buddhism, we find certainly lots of metaphorical examples where we can transfer our own karmic merits by transferring what our good karma has donated to us, or has provided us, I should say. If you're interested in the larger topic of karma, I have a number of videos on that, and I'll leave a link to a playlist of these videos up here on the screen if you haven't seen them or would like to take a look. If you're getting something out of these videos of mine, consider taking a look at my Patreon page as well. It's linked up here on the screen and down in the information box as well. And see if you want to help support the channel and the work that I'm doing here. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video. And meanwhile, all of you, be well.